Yes, it was possible to make plenty of money knocking on doors and selling solar, but it was never going to be scalable. And we didn't get into solar to make money. We got into it because we saw it as a way we could have the highest possible impact.
We've got Lester Crafton from Somerville, Tennessee. He has put his heart and soul into building Ovanova and really just pioneering the solar space.
The reason it's going away is because our grid is in trouble, Brian, like bad trouble. And because we're plugging these EVs in, they can just plug in whenever instead of intelligently. We're returning American manufacturing to America big time. That's huge energy demands. Where Bitcoin mining is ramping up. And if you understand Bitcoin, you know that's a lot of electricity. And we're getting ready to plug robots into the grid. That's a lot of electricity. We're electrifying everything, outlawing gas stoves, that's a lot of electricity. None of that is any electricity at all compared to what AI is going to use.
Welcome to the Grit.org podcast. In these episodes, they speak to top achievers in athletics and business to understand the habits and mindset they apply in order to build more grit.
Well, hello, my name is Brian Harbin. Welcome to today's episode of the Grit.org podcast. Super excited about our guest today. We go back a couple decades, and today's episode is brought to you by escrow.com, the most trusted online escrow service in the world. And the domain name says it all. But today we've got Lester Crafton from Somerville, Tennessee, graduate of the business school at UNC Chapel Hill, where he also partaked in a summer internship with Southwestern, where he worked for 18 years and really just climbed the ranks from sales to sales management, district sales manager, and then director, which was the highest you could go. And then for the last decade, he has put his heart and soul into building Ovanova. And Ovanova develops, deploys, monitors, maintains, and maximizes microgrids, and really helping. That's right, and really just pioneering the solar space. So, welcome, Lester Crafton.
Brian, thanks for having me on. For those of you guys who just know Brian as a podcast host, you may not know that he's one of the most unstoppable forces of nature that's ever existed. I've seen thousands of people go through this, what Brian calls an internship. That's more like a business Hunger Games for college kids. And he's definitely a victor. He came out on top and was able to inspire people to do things that I've seen very few people able to inspire people to do. So you already know it if you're connected to him and touched by him, but just personal respect and shout out to you and the top levels that you're able to reach, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate that, man. And definitely goes both ways. So really wanted to just go back to, growing up in Somerville, Tennessee. I know it's a small sub 5,000 person town in Western Tennessee. But yeah, tell us about family life, siblings, and any early principles you feel like that were instilled in you.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for asking. I love talking about where I grew up. It's such a beautiful place and good people. The kind of people that where it really matters if you do what you say you're going to do. And so I have a sister. She's 4 years younger than me. We fought like brothers and sisters do, but love each other now. And she's a connector. She runs the gas station that everybody comes to have lunch that does anything useful in the community, and have a niece who's about to be a high schooler, and she's going to break a lot of boys' hearts. She's a wonderful, sassy young lady, and I'm glad to be her uncle. And then growing up, my brother-in-law is cool too. And then my mom and dad, though, my mom worked at a cotton gin for 30 years as a secretary, business manager, did all the books, invoicing, all that stuff. And then after that closed down, she did childcare and raised some kids in the community who were awesome for some cool families. So she's that kind of loving, giving, kind, plays the piano at church, gentle spirit kind of woman. It's like loves me, but I probably embarrass her with 90% of the stuff that I say. And but I've never doubted that she loved me and was for me. And then my dad's the kind of man grew up working tractors, old tractors, disc, do-alls, cultivators, breaking plows, just equipment to do real farming with before it all became like tech farming, which it is now. But back when it required a lot of physical effort, we'd get up. And what I'll say about my dad is that I knew he always believed in me. He taught me just by example to work hard, tell the truth. I've never seen him lie to somebody for personal gain. And he also taught me, son, there's not a lot of opportunity around here. And so, you no matter how hard you work, never saw him complain about getting up and going to work a day in his life, to the point now his body's broken down. I've been home. The internet, you want to talk about these rural areas that I love serving with what we do, like the one where I'm from. Globalism's been awesome for people that could use computers and learn how to, be distributors of inexpensive Asian products in America. And that's capitalism, and to each his own. That's a good thing to do. It also shut down a lot of factories in rural America. It shut down a lot of opportunity in rural America. And rural America, my family's house just got high-speed internet on February 29th last year.
Wow.
So imagine if you spent the last 15 years, how many domain names would you have sold if people didn't have access to high-speed internet? It's crazy how far behind these areas have been left. No mistake. It makes sense why they trust Elon and Starlink more than they trust the government. They just makes sense.
So what about you growing up? Did you work in the farm life, or what was some of those early jobs or interests that you had?
Yeah, that's what from the time I was old enough to push a clutch down on a tractor, I've been changing oil and greasing alamites and pulling morning glories off cultivators and being out in the hot sun, or waking up at 5 a.m. to go slop some hogs for a neighbor farmer that I was working for. But basically, small farmers got killed when I was a kid. Dad started applying anhydrous ammonia. What I learned through that is I have good parents who love me. There's not much opportunity where I am. So I got to go figure out something. And leaving home, I thought, the only thing I knew that you could do, I knew I couldn't put this in words, but I wanted to do something where I made money because I didn't want to not have money. It just seemed like it caused a lot of problems where I was from. I wanted to do something that was societally respectable. I didn't want to go screw people over for money. And I wanted to do something that helped people. And so then through that program that we were joking about at the beginning, the internship Hunger Games thing, I learned at a young age I could go make money, and I learned I could help people, and I learned that when you get rejected a bazillion times, you don't really care so much about societal respect. You start to kind of wonder what's wrong with society. Why does it think so weirdly? I was just a college kid here with some educational books, and you didn't have 5 seconds to talk to me, although you're obviously not doing much. That was odd. That was just a strange response that I experienced. So,
well, and just to give some color, I want to give some color to that too. So yeah, basically, so was that your freshman year that you started selling books?
Yeah, knocking on doors. Yeah.
Yeah. So summer internship, selling educational books door to door. How did you get into that, or how did you know that was something you wanted to do?
And one of my buddies filled out some piece of paper, and then he referred me. And this guy, Kevin Johnson, who's another great guest you have on, he just sold his company for, some millions of dollars, and is now just enjoying going around to jam bands, But Kevin's one of the coolest guys I ever met. He called me and was like, "Hey, you've been recommended to me as a possible candidate for a summer internship." And I was like, yeah, I was a really cocky kid. And I was like, well, I should have been because I'm damn good. Which was just so stupid and a cocky thing to say. And I was like, but I'm getting ready to go out to the movies with these girls. And so I need to call you back. And he's like, Lester, I made $15,000 last summer. You need to listen to me. And I was like, all right, girls, I'll catch up with you. And he called me over. I heard about it. I almost didn't do it because my friend decided not to do it. I met another guy named Chris Samuels, and he just said, does anybody ever ask you where you want to be when you were 30? And that seemed like a million years away at the time. And I'm like, actually, no. He's like, well, where do you want to be? Like, do you want to be married? Do you want to have kids? Do you want your wife to have to work? And he's like, well, that's not a decision that you make when you're 30, those things. That's a decision that you make when you're 18. The same way your decision to come to school here, you didn't make that last year. You made that when you were 13 and decided to take algebra. And when you decided to do your homework after school. Like when you decide to have a job and develop discipline, like those are decisions that you need to make now. And he's like, what you'll someday be, you're now becoming. So if you're not willing to challenge yourself now, what makes you think you're ever going to be the kind of person who's willing to do that? And I was like, dude just called me out cold. And I didn't even know what we were doing, but somebody that was going to call me out on my BS was somebody that I wanted to learn from. So that's why I sold books.
I mean, two of the best right there, Chris Samuels and Kevin Johnson. And tell us about that first summer. I mean, what were some of the walls that you hit and some of the things you had to overcome and you know, what you learned from that first summer?
In my first summer, even no matter how many times people told me, I still thought selling was about talking people into stuff, or catching them at the right time, or putting them in the right situation, which is really just a different word for manipulative, you know? And that's kind of what happens whenever you aren't as committed to working as hard as you could. Was I working 8 hours a week? Yeah. Was I seeing 30 people a day? Yeah. But I still had an employee mindset. Like I was doing it because somebody probably dumber than I was telling me to do it. And so I had to go try it my own way. And I kind of did it their way. And I did well. And I did better than I remember my first summer, my first couple of days having customers, and realized I made twice as much as I made working at right before I sold books. After there was no more farm stuff to do, I worked at a grocery store, I played football, worked at a grocery store, then worked at a neurobiology lab, worked at a flea market, just worked 7 days a week to have money to pay for school that freshman year. So I'd made more money in my first day or two selling books than I did in like a week. And then I broke my ankle my third day. And my mom was like, "Are you going to come home?" I'm like, "No, I've already made more than I did. Like, I'll go on crutches." So I got to crutch around for a little bit. And I blame that on slowing me down my first summer, because I just never really got on like a hardcore, unstoppable. I'm here, I'm doing this. Your response is okay with me. So getting back to the story, first summer was just about learning that what I found resonates most with people who have no idea what we're talking about is how we used to find our places to live. Like, imagine being an 18-year-old kid, a week's worth of training, going out to someplace you've never been to do this thing that other people allegedly have done, but you've never seen it done. You know, there's a lot of people that seem like they know what they're doing, that are going to be there for you, but you're just doing this thing with no guaranteed pay. But before you can even get started, you have to find a place to live. You do that by knocking on doors and saying something like, "I know this is going to sound crazy, but my roommates and I are here this summer. We're going to be selling educational books, looking for a good place to stay. Don't want to stay in our apartments. Our parents feel better knowing we have like a host family. So just wonder if you or somebody you knew happen to have a spare basement or garage apartment." Anyway, going out doing something like that, and then all of a sudden meeting Wilma Jenkins, who's this amazing woman who had biceps bigger than mine. She was just awesome. And she's like, "Would this be okay?" And takes us down, and we have this beautiful basement to stay in. We didn't even have an alarm clock our first summer. She woke us up saying, "Boys, it's time to get up." And it was an amazing experience. So my first summer was really about believing there really were good people in the world, believing the crazy, stupid, why would you knock on doors to find a place to live, doing a job with no guaranteed play? It just is crazy. But I learned to embrace the absurd. I learned that, maybe I wasn't the smartest dude in the room, and I probably could learn from people that had been doing something for 150 years. And so my second summer, I actually embraced everything, went from an employee mindset to, here's people that just want to see me do as well as I can mindset, implemented a lot of stuff, and had an awesome second summer. But my first summer was just an adventure.
Yeah. And I love how you say that too, about assuming the best in people. I mean, I think that's such a small shift in mindset that you have to have, but man, what a happier way to live. And then obviously results in, way better success in sales. And I know you, one of the things that was a strong suit of yours was student management, right? So, obviously coming back additional summers, you're recruiting a team and helping lead them. What were some things you felt like were impactful from that part of the experience in terms of like managing and leading an organization?
Yeah, for me, what I've had a lot of time to unpack a lot of this stuff, and I think the most meaningful way to explain this was all leadership works best if there's clearly defined expectations. Otherwise, without it, then you're a wish fulfiller or somebody that is disappointing and a stalling figure standing over them. It's like people are dealing with their own parental stuff and projecting it on you without clear agreements. So with clear agreements, the ones that I found were the most inspiring, that were able to build an organization that could replicate itself and seems to have created some great success for people in the real world after they've been done. I'm sorry, I'm really cold in here. So if I sound like I'm like shaking, it's because I'm really cold. Gotta get the heat on. So need some more power here. So getting back to the relationship agreements, one thing is that I promised the people I worked with is that you can count on me to always be honest with you, even if it's not what you want to hear. Because in order to have any type of growth, we have to deal with reality. And that's just, I can't compromise that. You can't know where I stand unless you know where I stand. That doesn't mean I'm going to be a jackass and say mean things to you, but we have to agree that I'm going to be honest with you, and you have to believe that I'm telling you this for your sake and not just because I feel like saying something. Are you down with that? Yeah. Okay. You okay with it? Cool. Second thing you can count on me for is I'll lead by example. What does that mean? Well, it means if I'll never ask you anything I'm not willing to do myself. And what I learned that meant over time wasn't just I'll go out during the summer and do the 80 hours and the 30 demos and positive attitude. Not just that. It was deeper than that, because when you're asking an 18-year-old kid to go to some place they've never been, to do something they've never done with no guaranteed pay, what you're asking that kid to do is to do something that's hard and scary. And that's how you grow. You know, with the way to find growth opportunities is like, am I scared of it? Is it hard? If either or both of those elements are present, it's probably an incredible growth opportunity in my experience. So when I said I promise to lead by example, what I really meant is I'll grow with you. Like, it wouldn't be growing for me to go knock on doors, find a place to live. I've done it. It sounds scary as hell, but we know that we could do that if we had to. But what would cause me to grow is to learn how to give up control and allow organizational leaders to make more decisions, be more confident and trust in them. What could cause me to grow is to learn how to prepare a speech for 500 people. You know, what could cause me to grow is to let go of some concept that I have that's holding back organizational growth, because that's hard and scary for me. So, you know, my dad led by example of getting up and going to work and telling the truth, which puts it so deeply in me that that's just kind of what I do. You know, even if it seems like I'm doing nothing, I'm working. And then the last thing I promised people, and it's cheesy for adults, but for people coming into adulthood was powerful, is I promised the people I led that I would always believe in them. So I'll always be honest with you, even if it's not what you want to hear. I promise to lead by example. We'll grow together. And then I'll always believe in you. And what that means is no matter how down you get, I won't confuse where you are with who you are. Where you are is in some stuck spot on your journey. Who you are is someone capable of overcoming anything. And I also won't, by believing you, when you think you're doing as well as you possibly can, I'll believe that you're capable of more. And, you know, that last bit is probably why I'm still fortunate enough to work with the co-founder of my company, John Carey. You know, he's just a force of nature. And we've had that relationship now for 20 years. And it's now he does the same thing to me. So he leads me oftentimes. Like, he's ahead of where I am. I'm just one of those founders that's lucky enough to have such competent support. I don't have to be involved in the day-to-day operations. And what I can look at is where's the biggest opportunity available to us. And getting back to the leadership thing, all what I expected in the clear relationship from them. And I'm like, and I promise to do this, period. However, there are conditions, because I won't waste my time with someone that I'm not in an equally yoked relationship with. So what I expect from you is to be honest with me. I won't get mad at you. You don't have to lie to me because you think you're going to disappoint me. But I cannot support you if I do not know what is going on. Like, I can't work with corrupt data. Like, it's just, so you got to be honest with me. Like, I'll be responsible for my emotions. You know what's expected of you. If you fail to live into those expectations, let me know how, so we can encourage you to do better. Don't tell me you did, so I think you're doing something you're not, and you get more mad at me for not hearing it. It's like, cool, yeah. And second thing, you got to be coachable. I'm going to tell you stuff to do based on what you tell me, which I'm going to assume is true. Some of it's going to sound crazy. Some of it's not going to make any sense at all, but it's exactly what you need to hear. I'd give them some examples of that. And if you're not going to do it, tell me, nope, not going to do it. So we can come up with something else. I'll never run out of things that we can come up with to help you perform better based on what you told me and to be happier or whatever. But, you got to be coachable.
Absolutely.
And the last thing I'm expecting of you is to be committed, because it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. So if you're willing to be committed to growth and you can be in this relationship with me, then we can grow together until you're tired of being here. So, and I just went out and did the very best I could to live into telling the truth and leading by example and doing things that were hard or scary and believing in people. And for some reason that seemed to catch on, and a lot of people liked it at that moment in time. It seemed to work.
Yeah. And what's, the skill set required, the longer your Southwestern, your organization grows, you're leading leaders, and you can tell just from your mentality, just the relationship you had with people that, it's a tough thing. Like every year, it's a tough decision for people to come back and want to do it again, because it is such a grind and such a sacrifice. And so having that relationship and building that trust with people over time obviously was a huge contributor to your success. And where do you feel like, as you're approaching 18 years into the business at Southwestern, how did you decide it was time to, to move on, or, tell us a little bit about that decision about, figuring out that it was time to do something different?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of went crazy, because for me, I've just seen so many iterations that I could isolate variables from constants. If that makes any sense. Like there was just enough. I was able to separate processes from people, because I'd seen enough people come through to see what the processes were creating in the people and failing to help people create. And instead of blaming the individuals for not executing the processes, I'd had enough people that executed processes perfectly long enough that created results that showed me that the processes weren't perfect. So at the end, I was just looking at, I'm like, what's the very best thing about this whole experience? And to me, and probably the reason that I was around for so long, is because the guys we talked about at the beginning, Kevin Johnson, Chris Samuels, Matt Ross, Brandon Devlin, just all these, Chris Foster, Dave Lemon, just all these, Paul Koska, just all the guys, but I was fortunate enough for my whole career to have, there's usually like one person out of an entire year that ends up having a career with Southwestern for more than like 7 years. And I had two, like an unbroken chain of support that I had experienced since I was 18 years old that I knew had my best interest at heart, right? So having those guys there made it a lot easier for me than it would have been for a lot of people who, everybody was always coming and going. So that really helped a lot. And then at the end, I just saw it as incumbent upon me, because nobody else was going to do it, to try to create some systems that honored the mission, which was at the time to be the best organization in the world at helping young people develop the skills and character they need to reach their goals in life, like creating a grit.org podcast or an unstoppable microgrid company, like whatever it is we're up to. These are our goals in life. It worked as far as I was concerned. And I was like, I want this for everybody. I want to live in a world full of people who find a way. I want to live in a world full of people who tell the truth and try to serve other people, as opposed to looking at what's the least I can do to get the most out of it for me. Like people that show up and say, I'm going to contribute all that I can. Boy, I hope I learned something awesome. But in the meantime, I'm going to do as much good as I can. That mindset is just, I was blessed to be around that. It's hard to leave. Like, and when from the time I was 18 years old to the time I was like 35 years old, I never left college campuses. Like I didn't know that people got old and got jaded and started to settle and started to make excuses about it because they need a remodel or there might be some college fund. And it's like, oh, so that's why you can't dream anymore, because you think you're being responsible. You're basically blaming your family that you are lucky to have, very lucky to have, for not going after your dreams. I didn't know that was a thing people did, because I was around people that were 18 to 25 years old for 15 years. So my brain set up a little strangely. But by the end of it, I just wanted to give the very best parts to people. to honor that mission. So instead of trying to recruit people for a summer program, I thought it'd be better if the program were a year-round program just about the mission. So let's start some organizations on campus that essentially give people a student manager with that type of relationship that's defined, apply it to school. And so like we started at West Virginia University, the dropout rate's like 90%. Like we had 90% of people on like honor roll and scholar roll and like in school and thriving. And I just saw miracles happen from like, you're not allowed to recruit at this campus because some people failed a very challenging program, which was the case in some scenarios too. Welcome to our campus. Thank you for what you're doing for our students. And then just having a conversation with the students about the reason I can afford to be on campus doing this and providing this service for you is because of the service I provide in the summertime. What I've taught you is the Spanish class version of Success Principles. What I'm offering you this summer is a chance to go to Spain to really learn how to speak it fluently. And that all comes from our summer program. I know you'd be a great fit. You know, you can trust me because of what I've helped you do, get a girlfriend, start doing well in math, you know, lose weight, go to the gym, whatever their goals were. But that's all Southwestern really is an organization that's doing the best it can to help you achieve your goals. I just thought it got lost behind the recruiting and the selling and the money and wanted to put it out front. And that went really well in terms of having an impact on people. I stand by the decision, but it was very poorly enacted because you can imagine in a way that only you could what would happen if one of the youngest people in the top positions of the company all of a sudden said, hey, I know this has worked for 150 years, but maybe there's a whole radical different way that we could do it better. There'd be a lot of corporate immune system stuff. And, you know, whenever you've never done anything but the best you could, it's hard to understand why the immune system is attacking you when you're really just trying to do the best you can. But it sounds like you've lost your mind. So whenever I saw that there wasn't going to be a full on like embrace of like, let's move forward together. Let's move into a residual world. Let's move into a we don't earn money unless you benefit world. Let's give first. Because what they do is already so close to that, it's almost impossible to see the little bit of difference. And there's no way I could have articulated it. And looking back at how I fell apart after I left, I'm sure that I was so crazy that nobody could have heard what I was saying. So it was very challenging, but I left after having done my very best to honor what I believed was the true mission of the company in a flawed way. And then got lucky enough to get called into my next part of my journey and feel blessed every day to be a kind of man that's had two missions in life that he loved very deeply and has gotten to spend, decade plus in learning about. So,
yeah. And, it's, being part of Southwestern, it is, being part of that process and the growth and personal development, and you really evolve as a person. And I think, you really, a lot of us had an opportunity to develop and mature, I think, faster than other people our age. And so, you come to that realization even at, 35 years old was still, a super early decision to kind of come to that realization of like, hey, I really want to make a big difference. And then, and I know too, leaving is hard because that's all you'd ever done up to that point, all your relationships and friends. And so, and I believe too, you took a little bit of time off. And I think this is about the time where I remember seeing you would be on Facebook and you would go sit in a coffee shop and there was a stack of cards. I think, what is my word?
Like
what is your word?
Such questions. Like, those are open-ended questions.
Yeah. They come in a little bag. And I remember you watching you do this in a coffee shop, just, have a stack of cards with people and say, hey, pick a card. And I actually bought a stack of cards and would carry them around with me after that. And, I would do it more so with like family get-togethers and sales meetings and stuff like that. But it was just a way to have, true connection with somebody. And they were like deep questions like, hey, things like, what do you want to be doing in 5 years or, impactful things. And that's one thing that, I've always appreciated about you is just, really liking to have, deep conversations with people and get into their goals and dreams. And so kind of in making that, kind of in that gap in between Southwestern and figuring out what directed you to solar?
It's just the same way I got that lucky phone call from KJ, Chris Salata called one day, and I had no intention of leaving Southwestern at all. And he's like, Lester, you know what you should consider getting into? I was like, I'm kind of doing it, It's just like solar. And I was like, why is that, Chris? And he goes, solar can change the world. And I said, Chris, only love can do that. And goes, keep in mind, like, I'm considering deep levels of organizational building stuff at this point, basically started a nonprofit, blew up a business to do it, to serve people. But I'm like, all right, what's going on? And at that time, the solar business was full of like opportunity for door to door, which hadn't been a real opportunity for anything in a long time. And all of a sudden, the skills that they thought that they were recruiting when they were trying to recruit me seemed very valid. They wanted me to go do something I did when I was 19, which I didn't find out till I got out there. Didn't ask the right questions. I didn't realize Southwestern, for all of what I saw as its flaws, is kind of like complaining about your family. Like, like, why would you do that? They did the best they could, because whenever I got out, imagine being 35 years old and the first time you've dealt with what most people would consider normal, moral, ethical business is really just like, how many lies can I tell and get away with it before anybody figures it out? And that's like normal. And that's the world I walked into with the solar door-to-door sales. And I was like, where's the integrity here? This is an incredible product. Like, if people really knew the truth about it, they would want it. It wouldn't even need to be sold, much less with door-to-door people and lead setters and this loud noise, what's going on. But anyway, somehow had a fallout there. I thought Southwestern would be a part of the solar thing. I just kind of, I wasn't thinking clearly after 18 years. And at the end of my career, working 100 hours a week, taking a bunch of freaking Adderall, which is awesome to be off any of that crap. And just to have a normal brain back. It's been a lot of fun. But the period that you're talking about, my life after growing up on a farm, went to North Carolina, sold books in Nebraska, New York, and Ohio, and Wisconsin, and, all the fun places. And then did this long career, lived in Nashville, moved to New York because the girl that I married wanted to be an actress. And I told Chris Samuels I wanted my wife to be able to do whatever she wanted to do when I was 30. And the marriage didn't work out. The acting career didn't work out, but I love living in New York. It was a fun time. And then afterwards moved to Hollywood, and that's where I let myself fall apart. I'm like, I just had 50,000 conversations with people about what they wanted for their future, whether it's their kids' future or whether it was their future. And there's probably some good information buried in there somewhere. So I'm just going to let myself fall apart, which is what I never would have allowed myself to do at all.
Now, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is I'm not going to work to attempt to earn dollars. I'm not going to engage with people in a way where there's something that I'm trying to get from them at all. Like, I'm just going to go talk to humans, have conversations with humans, kind of try to figure out what's going on here. Humans, like, we can all agree that we have to work to keep the lights on. Like, I'm not talking wild commie stuff. I'm just talking about like, what do you think is going on here?
And it was kind of your way to kind of hit reset and kind of figure out what the heck was next.
Yeah, because I talked to people about at 18 years old about being hardcore enough to go work 80 hours a week in a straight commission away from home. Most people quit environment. Like, I've dealt with the most hardcore successful people, and I'm somewhat responsible for arcing people in that direction. Ultimately everybody's responsible for their own decisions, but I've definitely influenced some people into a hyper path, and nobody's like, I hate you for having a great life. But that I was like, but what about all these other people I'd never even spent any time with? What are they up to? Like, what are these artists doing? What are these writers doing? Like, what are these musicians doing? And so that's why I did stuff like how grew out my hair, wore dashiki every day for a couple of years, gave free hugs on the Santa Monica Pier, did some like leadership development stuff. But I'd worked hard, and I was, I was able to not have to worry about working. And I knew that if I were going to really enjoy the next part of my life, I needed to do something that I found to be meaningful and impactful to humans. It wasn't going to be going in and cashing in on my sales leadership skills or my sales consulting ability or all the things that are certainly valuable in the world to the right people, but it wasn't the game I wanted to play.
And then at that point, you synced up with John and you guys came up with the concept of Ovanova. Like, tell us about kind of the inception of that.
So when I left Southwestern, I took 15 of the best salespeople that I knew that had recently left the program with me. So like the Navy SEAL of direct sales people, like they're the best. So I could isolate the variable of, is this the thing that we're getting into? Like, are these the processes or is this the people? So I brought the best people, got involved in solar. Fiasco, like just a fiasco. It was the most failed leadership experience of my life. And it was like on top of what just happened at Southwestern, where I left as a pariah that, for just trying to do the best I could. And so it was like my mind was crazy. So I accept full responsibility for that experience. But luckily, one of those people I brought was John. And John figured out in 2 days what it took me a few months to be willing to admit is that yes, it was possible to make plenty of money knocking on doors and selling solar, but it was never going to be scalable. And we didn't get into solar to make money. We got into it because we saw it as a way we could have the highest possible impact. It's like our mission since 2012, when we started discussing weird concepts like what's the biggest goal that we could possibly think of, and decided it was saving the sun, got to reverse entropy in the next billion years or so. Okay, well, if you peel that all the way back to, well, what kind of people could be smart enough to do that? How would you help people live that long? What's a society got to look like? Well, what is it that makes society run? And if you peel it all the way back, you realize that you and I aren't having this conversation without access to energy. Our computers are running, there's servers running, there's a whole lot of fossil fuels burned to melt all the things in that microphone and deliver it to where you are, to get the cotton out of the field and process to make this hoodie. There's an incredible amount of energy. And so when we had this mission of that we use all the time, if we can, and so where our mission merged with the arm was, our mission was to add as much value as possible to as many lives as possible, as soon as possible. Like, we knew that that's what we wanted to do. So it's like, okay, we got fortunate to get molded into these people who pretty much have every opportunity open that we want. Like, want to go work as a VP of sales or want to go found an insurance company. Cool, can do those things. What do we want to do? What lever do we want to pull? There's a lot of problems that need to be solved. Government's a bad problem, education, healthcare, cleaning the rivers, the oceans, and plastic, and blah, blah, blah. There's a million problems to solve. I'm not poo-pooing any of those. But we're looking at, well, to solve any of those problems, is there a variable there? And it's like, yes, energy. Like, you can't solve any of those problems without energy. And from a physics standpoint, energy is just the ability to do work. And work doesn't necessarily make things better, but at least if it doesn't make things better immediately, at least it teaches you what not to do. And it teaches you the lessons that you need to make things better. So I just believe that work always makes things better. And more energy means the ability to do more work. And so that's all we're doing is like, okay, we got a lot of work to do to make a world that makes sense, because we have all these problems. How are we going to solve the problems? We need some energy to do that. We need some technology to do that runs the, otherwise the energy is just sitting there like it was for the Native Americans, because their horses couldn't use the oil that was running in the streams. But can you imagine if the Native Americans had found the oil first and learned how to use it, and then been waiting on us with their tanks when the Europeans sailed over? It's a wild world to think about that. So.
Yeah. And you guys really took, back then, the model for solar was just, like you said, going door to door and kind of selling it that way. But you guys had an interesting spin on it. I remember when you guys first started and you guys were doing more over Zoom, and you were presenting it as an opportunity to be able to raise funds and also get the conversation started with solar. So tell us about how that started and how it went.
Thanks, Brian. I'm so proud of that part of our journey. That's like the most idealistic and beautiful part of what we were doing is, for a listener looking for like a quick tidbit that's useful to apply to your business, like this was the question was, all right, or the belief is that when trust is high, the cost of doing business is low. You buy a concert ticket, maybe the concert ticket people had to spend marketing to reach you, but you call me and say, Lester, your favorite band's in town. You know that because we trust each other. I trust that you have my best interest in mind. And they sell that second ticket because of the trust that we have, and it costs nothing, right? I mean, it's just, you see this everywhere you go. If the trust is high, don't have a bunch of lawyers involved. Don't have a bunch of people that don't do what they say they're going to do to need lawyers to begin with, which is why you trust people, because they are people of integrity. But
why referral-based businesses do really well, right?
They do real well. And there's a reason why people refer them, because people know that their relationship with their person they're referring won't be damaged. Like that, people care more about the relationships, at least if you're building a referral-based business, and they do about the money that they get from waking up or nudging the person. It's just too easy to nudge people now. So anyway, when trust is high, the cost of doing business is low. When trust is low, the cost of doing business is high. And what we saw is that we basically got hired to go out and knock on doors just to let people know that something existed that they should have just been interested in knowing existed, especially in California, where it saved them so much money to just say yes. Like, it didn't make any sense that everybody didn't want to do it. But we saw door-to-door was already burned, and California is the most developed market and the one where it had made the most financial sense. So it's like, well, there's no long-term here. What else could we do? And then the question is, where do people trust each other? And like, I don't know, like, how do we add value? Like, who are we to tell people how to add value? But there are people who are trying to add value, and that seems to be the same people trust. How do you know? Because they volunteer their time or their money to these organizations. So what's that? That's youth sports. Like, there's an agreement that something good is going on here that's worth supporting, and it's worth the time of adults, and it's worth the resources of the community. That's, that's church groups going on missions trips. That's a choir singing, So whether or not it was a Miami gay men's choir or the church group that we worked with in Michigan building a thing in Haiti, but it was mainly like cheerleading groups and youth sports groups. And what we would do is we would just say, hey guys, I'm going to skip the first 4 years and get to what it became like in the end. I'm not going to complain about all the people we couldn't find to execute this with us and tell you what we ended up doing, mostly in Florida. Through some help of some friends down there that you recommended, Brian. You remember recommending John Johnson and Christian Santana?
Oh, yeah.
Like, those are the boys that set us up with all these schools that taught us all these lessons. So you're directly involved in that. Thank you. And so what we would do is we talk to these groups and say, for every homeowner that comes on, we'll give you $50. Nobody has to buy anything. We just want to show you how cool solar is and have a conversation about it. That's what we would do. It's like, here's some cool stuff about solar you might not know. You have any questions? Like, oh, that is pretty cool. Yeah, we'll hop back on if you want to, and we'll create a solar design for your property, and together on Zoom, so you can hang up whenever you want to. I'm not in your house making you feel uncomfortable and weird. We're just answering questions. And we just got real lucky. And that when we started doing this is about the same time that you started to be able to design things remotely, because there's enough satellite imagery and services making it possible. And so that's how it began. So we started as a socially responsible lead gen company. Found out that we had to become a sales company in order to be responsible with the members, because what church or school group wouldn't rather send 10 people on to earn $500 than to sell cookie dough that's going to give people diabetes, or to sell wrapping paper, or to sell magazine subscriptions. Like, it's something that everybody felt like they could do that was good together, and we loved doing it. And what that created for us was there's a cheerleading group in Florida, and the only restriction is you have to invite a homeowner, not a homeowner from your local area. So she has an uncle in Ohio that's a homeowner. He hops on, and then we recognize, wow, solar is different in different places. It's not just this message everybody hears about save some money on your electricity bill or whatever. Like, that doesn't work like that in Ohio. But we're on a mission to add as much value as possible, as many lives as possible. And he's like, can we use this fundraising mechanism for my son's Little League baseball team? Sure. Well, now we got 20 people in Ohio to talk to about. And we can't use the same canned sales talk we were using in Florida and California, where they made solar easy with legislation, which is why all those door-to-door salespeople are there.
Basically, the reason it's, and so I understand too, for everybody else, is that California and Florida, are there tax credits that you get for solar panels, or what's the benefit? Why is it more easier to sell panels in Florida and California?
California just changed. So why was it easier in California? Why is it easier in Florida? California, do you know how much you pay per kilowatt hour by any chance? It's not a number most people know on your electric.
I know ballpark what my electric bill is each month, but don't know the breakdown.
Yeah. My guess is probably around 11 to 14 cents if you're in Florida. Maybe a little bit more, but around there per kilowatt hour. In California, it's 3 to 5 times that. So the value of solar, period, is that you're going to use electricity. Like, how much is your power bill roughly a month? You're in a nice place, probably over $1,000 in that range.
It's like $500 or $600 a month.
So it's a good job on being conservative with your utility usage. Sounds like you have a little bit of awareness and good insulation and good appliances that are efficient if you're only using $500 or $600 a month. So, but that's $6,000 over the course of a year. That's $60,000 over 10 years. That's $120,000 over 20 years, and 20 years from now, and that's assuming the price of electricity never goes up. That's $120,000 over 20 years that you are already committed to spending. And not only committed to spending, but committed to spending whatever the equivalent is that you need at the moment with whatever it costs. And you're just basically a slave at that point. Like, just do whatever you want to, master, versus I can create power myself. That wasn't an option until this technology became available. And if I can create it myself, then that means that I don't have to buy it from you. So 20 years, I've wasted 120 grand just because I didn't have a couple of seconds to think about, oh yeah, I guess I have consented to this never ending, always escalating bill that's never going to go away. And 20 years from now, I won't be a day closer to paying it off. And if I put the same money into generation equipment for my property that can generate its own power, then I will own that at some point. And
so basically the payoff is a lot quicker because, right, even if you spend, say, 20 grand on getting solar, you'll be able to make that money up and pay itself off, especially if you're planning on being there for a while. And I think one of the early challenges you guys had as well is, I remember when you guys had quoted my house, one of the issues we had was I had to get it was like a Tesla battery, but I needed to have 2 of them because I think in some cities, like in the city we're in, is that any extra electricity you create goes back to the power company and you don't get a credit for it. So they're basically taking your free power. So it requires you to get these Tesla batteries. But since we had to have 2 of them, that makes the cost go up significantly, right? So I don't know if I explained that right, but
whenever I was talking about the guy in Ohio, that's basically what I meant. Is like where you live is different than other parts of Florida. Most of Florida, this is how it works. And this is the short answer to why California and Florida were both easy to sell in, because the policy that they had in place was that, hey, if you make some extra energy your house doesn't need at noon, then send it back to us. And if you need it at 10 o'clock at night, no problem. And that's what the policies were like. So you didn't need batteries, which is why the door-to-door sales force grew, because it's pretty easy to explain this. Solar panels make power. You're not buying it from your utility company. Therefore, you're saving this much money that you would have spent that you're just making toward your solar payment. Simple. But it's not really valid. It's not thinking about the utility companies, because what they want. So where you are, they said, no, we're not going to do that. Sometimes we need power. Sometimes we don't. We don't know when that is, but you can make your own power, but anything you blast back to the grid, we're only going to give you wholesale for, just like we would the guy that owns the natural gas generator, just like the guy that owns the the coal power plant. Like, why would we pay you more for energy that you're just blasting on the grid because your property happens to not need it right now, right?
Yeah.
And so that changes the value payoff. And in California, if electricity costs 3 times more, then it takes 3 times less time to recognize the value of being able to generate your own energy. So in most places, they had that 1-to-1 trade-off. It was called net metering. Florida still does. It's going away everywhere. And solar companies say it's because they don't like solar, but that's not true. And that's what we learned in the last 3 years. The reason it's going away is because our grid is in trouble, Brian, like bad trouble. And because we're plugging these EVs in, they can just plug in whenever instead of intelligently. We're returning American manufacturing to America big time. That's huge energy demands. Where Bitcoin mining is ramping up. And if you understand Bitcoin, you know that's a lot of electricity. And we're getting ready to plug robots into the grid. That's a lot of electricity. We're electrifying everything, outlawing gas stoves, you know, that's a lot of electricity. And none of that is any electricity at all compared to what AI is going to use.
And even if so like with the current supply of oil and gas, for example, like, you know, how much of a gap does that leave that solar needs to help make up?
I mean, really none. We'll get plenty of oil and gas. If that's what we want to do. We should shut off all the solar tomorrow, but we just spent the last decade building these intermittent power resources. And if anybody thought it through, you just wouldn't want somebody's dad going to a coal mine or an oil field to get fuel when it's falling out of the sky for free any longer than you have to. It's just not a desirable world. It doesn't make sense. And it also doesn't make sense to demonize oil and to demonize fossil fuels because they're the reason you and I can have this conversation today. Mm-hmm. They are the ones that provided the fuel to provide the energy to do the work to make this world better than the 1800s. And they continue to do it today. It's just that it costs us $5 billion a day as a nation to do it. And so it's not about making up the gap. It's about that we just don't generate nearly enough to do all the things that we're getting ready to do. And so our solution to that is make sure that every property, at least, is energy secure. And we do that with microgrids. So what microgrids are some type of generation capacity. We choose solar because sunlight's free. Might as well have a free fuel source. And you don't have to worry about broken down bridges to be able to access it. You know, one of my favorite stories from this Hurricane Helene thing that's happened is we went to a little town called Marshall, found somebody that had solar, like in a little apartment building store thing. And most people don't know this, but solar without batteries will not work if the grid is down, even if it's sunny outside. So if you just have solar panels, you have no energy security. You have energy that lowers your light bill as long as everything's working fine and you can send it back to the grid. But solar without storage doesn't work. So we hooked some batteries up to it, put some smart controls on it. And for 46 days, this little property in downtown Marshall, North Carolina, had power while the grid was down for 46 days. It did not require fuel being shipped over a bridge. It did not require a noisy generator that damaged the electronics. It didn't require any like air pollution from burning, the fuel to power the generator. It just sat there and it worked. The sun came up, it powered the building, the extra went into the battery and they had it to use during the evening, and that provided power for a whole town. And that's what we're working on. I don't care about saving money on a monthly bill. It's the wrong conversation. I care about up-leveling people to be able to generate their own power, store their own power, and have security so that even if the grid gets wrecked, you and your people and your property and your business property, they're going to be all right, And because of the choice that you made to be able to produce, you also can support the big grid when it needs it most, which is going to open up all sorts of financial incentives that would just confuse the heck out of everybody if I started talking about. But just know this, sometimes the electricity company has no problem making all the power anybody's needs, like at night, especially if in the spring, and there's no heat on. There's everybody's sleeping, not a big deal. No air conditioners, like easy peasy. But sometimes, like hot summer afternoons, when every air conditioner's on and every building cranked up, and then people come home, they turn on their stoves right at the time the sun's going down, so those giant solar fields can't help anymore. It's like the grid's like, please. And it's like, oh yeah, I got to plug in my EV too and turn on my Bitcoin miner and train my AI computer. It's like all of a sudden, when it used to be easy to do these things, with this extra stuff we're doing, it's about to get hard all the time. And what we got lucky enough to be as pioneers, which I think is the right word to describe us, is that we were the first company in America, solar company, to stop selling solar without batteries. Like if you called and said, I want a quote for solar, and it's like, well, if you want a microgrid that's solar and storage and smart controls, then we can have that conversation. If you mean you want to price shop for solar, go talk to one of the 10,000 companies that do that. We don't offer solar without storage because of its grid impact and because of the future value to you. Because when you have battery storage that you can put on the grid whenever it begs for it, that there's already Connecticut, there's already all kinds, Texas. These programs are coming online right now. And why would you know about it? You don't even know how much you pay per kilowatt hour. It's an auto bill. Like energy's so easy and has been for so long, especially if you're successful. You don't care about your $6,000 a year as long as the lights stay on. It's just what you do. You don't even think about it. But in aggregate, it's a giant problem. And the best way to solve it is to give everybody the opportunity to have the technology necessary.
And you guys combine that idea of the panels with the batteries. And then now I know you guys have kind of gone from that model of, I know you guys have evolved that model. I know now you're kind of specializing in doing these microgrids in rural communities. So tell us how that came about and more about that.
Yeah, man. So from bouncing around, giving money away to people to have conversations about solar, we ended up installing solar in 25 states and working with 60 different utility companies. So we got really good at understanding all the differences everywhere to find the theme, like isolating those variables. What's a constant? What's a variable? Constant, power's being made and being sent back to the grid. Variable, how's that treated? Okay. And it's wild, all the different things. And so we just started paying attention to different things. Like there's different incentives in different states and there's different ways things are done. And that Inflation Reduction Act thing that got passed with 87,000 IRS agents, there happened to be a tiny sliver in there for rural America. It was called the Rural Energy for America program. And it was $1 billion for solar and battery systems in areas just like the one where I grew up, where my dad said, you have to get away because there's no opportunity here. And so for me, I was like, oh my gosh, here's a chance to finally help my hometown. Like with these incentives, I can give them 90% off, sometimes free based on their address, up to $2 million worth of solar and batteries. If we can just learn how to write this 300-page grant application.
So basically using, grant money to be able to, and the government is incentivizing it basically to help this kind of overarching, energy problem, right?
Yep. In rural communities, and which is where I'm from. And most people don't understand rural communities because they're too, unless you're from a rural community, it's hard to really understand the people in a rural community. But the only thing that really matters there at all comes back to trust. Like, have you done anything around here? How do we know you? Because they've been promised so many things for so long that haven't come to be, that they're just no trust. They say things, I don't trust the government. I don't like this renewable energy. It's like, but okay. Do you like to have your lights stay on when the grid goes down? Of course. Would you like to get rid of your electricity bill? I don't know why the government's wasting all this money on you either, but they are. And here's some proof. Like, we had $7 million worth of these projects approved last year. We have $125 million in the pipeline, and it's all for small business owners in rural communities and ag producers anywhere. And so that got us really partnering up with these rural electrical cooperatives and understanding what their needs were. And so our next evolution So yeah, we got really lucky. We found a grant program. We learned about tax credits and how to transfer those. So we have, I think, $2.7 million right now in tax credits. So if you know anybody that has $2.7 million in taxes they're going to pay and they'd rather pay less than that, then they can give us a discount for those tax credits, and that's a discount on their taxes. So there's just all kinds of wild stuff to learn about. But we knew that if we put it together, what it meant was free solar for farmers. Not the kind that eats up their field, but on their barns, like on the chicken barn, like on their tool sheds, like where they can use it themselves and help support these grid edge communities, these low income, forgotten places where the coal mine is shut down or the coal power plant has gone away, or there's a lot of people that work in oil and gas. That's an energy community, low income community, self-evident. Grid edge just means that the power goes out all the time and people just get used to it. And we just need more support out on the fringes. The same way my fingers are cold right now because they're out on the fringes of my body. These grid edge communities, get some cold electricity reception, which would, you get what I'm saying, bad metaphor, but you get it. Like, yeah. So there's all kinds of things where it makes sense to use tax money to do that with.
So, even with the tax money and the grants, there's still a problem you guys face, right? In terms of, okay, let's say you've got a grant that can, pay for 90% of a microgrid for this particular farmer, but you still have to have capital to build it before you get the grant, right? So tell us a bit about that gap and the problem that you're working on there.
That part of the problem we've almost solved. When we get to the next part of the story, that's the problem that we're working on now. But thank you for opening the door there because it is still available. We're getting ready to meet with some people that haven't signed the NDA yet, but we have a lot of paths forward. What we've done so far to solve this problem, the problem is, as Brian said, we sign up a project, a grant is approved, and the grant value plus the tax credit value is enough to pay for the entire cost of the project. So there is no repayment risk. There's just, can the project be constructed? Because in order to claim that value, it comes after the project is constructed. One of the USDA rules doesn't allow us to self-fund. So we have to go out and raise the money ahead of time for the people, because what we learned from talking to the people that we serve, they're like, we'll be glad to see if this works and glad to do it if it does, but we're not going to go out and get a loan that's going to affect our DTI. That's going to mean that I can't buy a cotton picker if mine breaks just because I applied for some grant. And if what you're telling me is the truth about it all being paid back by government, I don't know why I should have to have a lien on my property. You want to put a lien on the solar equipment, fine. But I don't know why this has to do with my personal credit worthiness if what you're saying is true. And we said, we agree with you. And so that we basically had to create bespoke financing. And we couldn't find banks that wanted to work. Well, we found one bank that wanted to work with us, but their terms were so bad, we told them, forget it. And then because we're like, you just weren't paying attention. Like, this is a government-backed project. The risk is whether or not we can do the construction. Do you want to see the video of us doing construction? Do you want to talk to our construction leader crew who has a 150 IQ, whose brother does countdowns at SpaceX? Do you want to see our processes? Here's the risk. And all we need to do this is dollars, right? So give us dollars to do the construction. And then you get this money back from the government plus interest. And so we had to do that with crowdfunding. So we found this little outfit called climatize.earth. So if you go there, it's just all these Californians that care a lot about carbon stuff. And, they're glad to have carbon removed from the atmosphere. I care about energy resiliency. It's not that I don't think climate change is real. I just think that it's so loud and politicized and creates bad solutions like solar without batteries that, it's not worth talking about. But anyway, so crowdfunding. So we'll go out and raise $1 million or $2 and then we do it that way. But yeah, we'd love to have a big fund of just a giant credit line. So I didn't have to go fill out a bunch of crap for a Jobs Act to do crowdfunding to fund a project that's 100% backed by the government. I'd rather just have somebody that was smart enough to be like, no, I'd like to earn some interest from backing these projects out in rural communities, doing something good for America and making our energy future possibly give us a chance with what we're up against on the grid. But what that led to, so there's one last part of this story to know about, where this evolution has taken us, is we've gone from giving money away to have conversations about solar after hugging people with long hair with open-ended conversations at cafes to figure out, what was the world telling us? And what we heard the world say was, we want to do what we want, when we want, how we want, where we want, with whom we want, for whatever purpose we choose. And when it's over, we want to be healthy, safe, and loved, And they might not have said that overtly, but that's what everybody's saying. And, to the extent that people are able to do that, I think they generally feel pretty happy. When it starts to be constrained by other people's desires, then they start to feel frustrated and mean. And the truth is that, it's a lot easier. I told somebody the other day, we were talking about doing something impossible, like desalinating enough water to put the fires out in California. That's just, that wouldn't be hard if you had enough helicopters and you had enough desalination plants, but you don't, because we're spending too much money. We spend $5 billion a day setting it on fire instead of creating a super abundant energy thing, right? And that sounds impossible to us. But I drove 15 miles in a snowstorm the other day, and I didn't get cold and I didn't get wet because I was inside a car, because that's the technology, and it had energy that allowed me to go and be comfortable and warm, where 100 years ago, me and my horse might have frozen to death on the mountain pass in that same environment. So when you're talking about desalinating the ocean to put fires out in California, if you know that that's already possible technologically, and what you're missing is energy, then where we get really fired up is thinking about energy and having people produce enough for themselves and to share with their neighbors and to be able to do it intelligently. But what we recognized is that sharing with your neighbor part means you got to be connected to the grid. And have you ever heard of the stats, Brian, from what would happen if the grid went down? Do you know the projection for what that means for the death toll in the United States?
Oh, wow. No, but I know there's definitely plenty of movies that kind of help paint a pretty quick picture of what that would look like, right?
Yeah, there's a great book called 1 Second After that does the best job of painting the picture of any that I've run across. The 2 studies I've read says that within 1 year of a grid collapse, 2/3 to 90% of Americans would perish for reasons you don't think of. I know diabetics, they need insulin. There's no insulin being produced and refrigerated because there's no electricity to run the factories. There's no gas to pump. There's the pumps don't work. There's not enough generators. The fuel runs out. There's no insulin that gets delivered. Diabetics die. Then there's no food. There's no grocery stores. Then that turns into a really bad situation really quickly. And I can go into technical reasons.
Oh yeah. Why. Bank accounts and no wires going out. Nobody's getting paid. Yeah. It's, so that you're saying that leads to the problem you guys are working on now in terms of people, just more buy-in from more people.
Well, what it works in now is that we know that the buy-in is inevitable. We know that we have a technology stack that any properly educated person would be willing to pay whatever it was they needed to pay in order to have access to it. We can provide the kind of service behind that makes people go, heck yeah, glad we worked with those guys. But what we figured out is that it does no good at all if you have 100 million of these beautiful power plants on people's properties that are supporting the grid and making the AI possible and the Bitcoin mining possible, because we're just generating enough power all over the place where it's a symphony of giving everybody what we need. Too much sunlight. Now it's in the batteries, not enough sunlight, plenty. So in that world, wouldn't it be terrible if a foreign country could just hijack all these power plants that have to be intelligently managed, which means software, which means internet. And then one afternoon when the grid's counting on them to be there, they flip the other direction. And instead of supporting the grid, they harm it by requesting extra power from the grid. And so you remember the expression begin with the end in mind. And so when you're thinking there's already 100 million people who have these things up, even if right now there's just a few thousand, but you understood the technology, you would want it. Who doesn't want to be able to keep their house on no matter what happens to the grid? Who doesn't want to earn a whole bunch of money through energy arbitrage from real-time grid support from your batteries. It's just really, it's a cool game. Who doesn't want to be able to shed whatever load you're not using? Because why do you want your hot water heater to run at 2:00 in the afternoon when nobody's home and it's obvious that nobody's home? But you also don't want anybody to have access to that information. You don't want them to be able to control it. It's important that it be secure. And about a year and a half ago, John, who we keep talking about because we're the first people to put this technology up, there was just a firmware update, a nice firmware update that got pushed, and it shut his lights out at his dome. And John lives in a dome home that he rebuilt with his hands. And so the lights.
I've seen that before. It's interesting.
It's a wild place. John's a genius. And so the lights go out. And that bothered us because we're like, man, if we start putting these up in other places, that's going to be inconvenient for us to have to deal with a sloppy firmware push. But we didn't really connect it that, wait a second, that firmware push happened from China. So if we forget calling it a firmware push and we just say, wait a second, somebody in China just turned off the lights at somebody's house in America. Is that okay? And we just thought, no, it's just not. So for about the last year, we've been working on software to maximize the power of these things to utility companies. And we just formed a partnership with a Department of Defense contractor to provide the same level of security on the devices we're deploying that is used to secure nuclear communications. And so, yeah, we need construction capital, but we're also raising this 10% debt note, $10 million debt note, which has a 15% return quarterly interest payouts, just to scale up operations because those devices are going to be deployable by the end of this quarter. And we just have giant opportunities that we've unlocked by actually caring about people. Like it was paying attention to the power plants that weren't working like we said they would. Like I'll always be honest with you, even if it's not what you want to hear, right? I'll lead by example. It's uncomfortable for me to admit that I picked a battery manufacturer that for whatever reason can't get their BMS stuff to work. And that I accept responsibility that we haven't gotten into manufacturing yet, but that we never wanted to do any of this stuff. We wanted to give away money to churches and schools to talk to them about how awesome solar was. And we figured that's something everybody would get behind. But because of the relationships of the people at the churches and schools, we had to do what we said we would do, and we had to make it right. So then it's like, oh, we can't use all equipment. You can't use all construction people. Oh, you have to start your own construction company. Oh, you have to find your own financing. It's just like, it's been fun for a kid that went out at 18 and knocked on doors to find a place to live. And,
I mean, it's been quite the journey and quite the grind. It's been, fun keeping up with you through the process. It's been incredible to see how, this business has evolved just because you guys, stuck with it and kept trying to figure out a way. And I think too, innovation when it comes to solar has so much potential as well. I mean, you think about even with, I've thought about before just because, even with hurricanes, big part of the issue is the high temperature of the water, right? So what if we put solar panels out there in the ocean? You can use it. Obviously, you're getting a ton of sunlight, but then you can use it to keep the water cool. So, and during hurricane season, so that, and even, if there's trees that the leaves can collect solar, but then it also can collect rain and filter it. I mean, I feel like there's people a lot smarter than me working all that stuff. But I think it's going to be fun to see it evolve. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you too, a friend of mine was talking to her yesterday. She lives in Arizona, and she said one of the neat things about Arizona is they're completely immune to with the mountains around them, they don't get, hurricanes, they don't get earthquakes, they don't get any of these natural disasters. So a lot of these tech companies, make a hub out of there. Is there anything, any long-term potential you think specifically with Arizona being a great spot for solar, or any insight to that at all?
I mean, if you can see your mailbox and you had solar panels, you'd be producing power. doesn't require that much.
Yeah.
So I don't see anywhere as not having great future solar potential, because right now people have naked roofs that, like you're saying, you're starting to see some of the alternative benefits of solar. Like when you're talking about cooling the water down, you're recognizing the shading benefit, right? And so if you put solar panels on your house, you're protecting your roof from that direct sunlight, and you're also turning the electricity, or turning the sunlight into electricity, which is just obviously a better steward of the resources that you've been given. You're protecting your roof, and you're not wasting the sunlight that otherwise is just hitting your naked roof. And so just about everybody has naked roof. Not everybody, but a lot of them do. But do I think that solar panels ought to go out in fields? Personally, you're entitled to use your property however you wish. I know people have benefited personally from those arrangements, and I'm not going to talk bad about it. But it makes a lot more sense to me to put them up in space, which is the next coolest thing that's going to happen. The technology is already there. It just wasn't affordable to get enough solar panels to space until Elon made that giant rocket and caught it in his arms, and now it's cheap enough to put them up there. So you got 24 hours a day, sunlight, no clouds, beam the power back to Earth in all weather conditions. And I imagine that's something that you'll start hearing more about within the next 5 or 6 years. But people are they're real companies with real funding that are really doing it. And the technology's existed since the 70s. It's just been the ride to space. But
so 2 more questions here. So tell us about, where you see Ovanova going from here, and anything that you think we should know or anything we can do to help.
Thanks, Brian. We're blessed beyond measure right now. We got really lucky to find a program we were able to implement. We have $120 million worth of pending business in our pipeline. We don't know what percentage of that will be approved, but our past success tells us that we'll be at least a sizable percentage of that. We have other higher value things to work on. So if we're not looking for business, if you know a rural small business that would like for us to write a grant application, we'll be happy to do that for them. We don't charge for that service, but we're not looking for business. What we're looking for right now, where we're going next, is we are going to maximize microgrid technology. We're going to make it safe and secure to be deployed anywhere on the American grid. And we're going to utilize those assets to guard the grid. So if you would like to be a grid guardian, which is somebody that either deploys the system to make it possible for your property to have power no matter what happens to the grid, allows you to support the grid when you're producing too much, and to do that in a secure, intelligent way, and would like to be a part of building that, then we can either build something for you. Would rather have you understand the need of the moment, which would be, we need $10 million that we're going to raise. We've already found $1 million, but if you're watching this, it might already be too late. But if you want to be in touch, we can, with great interest rates, because we don't want to sell equity in our company. And we have the resources to be able to get that done. And I don't like dealing with banks because they haven't been helpful for the first 10 years. And we're going from there. So we're creating a nation of grid guardians. Our grid's in trouble. If you're the type of person that is willing to do more than your part and do it smart for the benefit of others, then there's some way that you can help, whether it's letting us make money for you or teaching you how to bring this to your community, or any idea that you have. We're open to partnership, but we're definitely on a mission, and it's to add as much value as possible, as many lives as possible, as soon as possible. And we choose energy as the lever to pull for that.
And where do people go to get more information on becoming a grid guardian? Just go to ovanova.co.
Yeah, just go to Ovanova.co.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I've ever said Grid Guardian in that way, but that's what we call it. The secure system that we're developing will be the Grid Guardian system. We see people who raise their hand and say, I want to be a Grid Guardian by deploying this so I can have energy security at my property and move towards that in my community to keep the grid up for America. So we can do all this crazy stuff we want to do without causing blackouts in communities. And we love your support. Like if you know people, like our next game is manufacturing. It's a good time to support us now because every game from this gets bigger and more fun, but it's all real. It's just, if it weren't happening, if all this hadn't happened to me personally, I wouldn't believe it was true. We're just got lucky to work 10 years with grit, to not give up when it would have been really easy to give up, to find some unique lessons, all in a way to how do we add as much value as possible, as many lives as possible. The reason it's important to see people as good, to me, to loop it all the way back around to the beginning, why I learned my first summer that there's good people out there, is it's really hard to wake up in the morning whenever you have earned nothing for 5 years and want to continue to develop something for other people if you don't think other people are good. Like, why would you develop something good for people who aren't going to appreciate it? Why would you develop something good that people that you believe would never value? It's okay if they don't see the value immediately. That's probably good feedback that you need to make it better. But ultimately, if you believe that people are good and they're worth serving and you can do something that's useful for them and you don't give up, it's our experience that great things happen. And we'd love to have people that are aligned there philosophically, that want to support what we're doing, because America is in trouble when it comes to the amount of energy we're producing and the way we're doing it. And we got to act fast. And I believe that we will. So
I love that. And yeah, you guys are the Grid Guardian. We'll be the Grit Guardian. How about that?
The Grit Guardian program.
Yeah. And, just, to your point of helping people, I mean, the reason you're cold, because you're in a warehouse right now, that you guys have a whole bunch of donated items, for basically the Hurricane Helene, which, impacted y'all's area extremely, and still suffering. Right. And so you guys have set up kind of a,
our nonprofit directors over here, so where this came from is that people were so generous during Helene and they wanted to help so quickly that they sent too much of some things like clothing. And so all of this was about to be rained on or thrown away to become a problem in a landfill. And so then we just happened to have a nonprofit and decided that we were going to use it for hurricane relief. So that story about going into the mountains and putting the batteries on to the store that was able to have power for 46 days. We did that as a company, but it was more of a nonprofit thing. The girl that's the nonprofit director, Zena, she's actually from this area that got destroyed by Helene. And she's the one that's super resourceful, like all mountain people are. And she just couldn't stand to see this stuff go to waste. So we had a big Christmas party and gave away, I think, 500 bags of clothing that day. We've given, I don't know how much, to the homeless ministry and recovery ministries. The doors are open. The stuff was intended for the community, so we intend to make it available to the community for as long as possible.
In Somerville, right? Somerville, Tennessee.
This is in Elizabethton, Tennessee, which is basically right on the border of North Carolina. Zena, you want to say hi real quick to this person? You want? No? Okay. She's doing it.
Oh, it's all good.
She's on another phone call.
Hey, so last question, Lester. I wanted to ask you this. And, as you know, at grit.org, we're big on the Grit Creed and the 12 principles that, we're passionate about baking into the next generation. And I love how you've already mentioned a couple of them today that were a big part of, our upbringing and with Southwestern and some of those life and success principles that are absolutely timeless and, relate to all different parts of life. But of the 12, which one do you think resonates most with you and why?
I don't know the 12 grit principles, so I would guess being honest.
Well, you did say earlier the I'm someday going to be what I'm now becoming, which is
not a grit principle.
Yeah, that's one of the that's the first part of the grit creed. And then I remember you said Chris Samuel said that to you when you were 18 years old, and
yeah, I mean, I would probably like every one of them. You're welcome to read them here to me to give me inspiration for the day if you want. But obviously that one put me on the greatest adventure of my entire life. Just thinking about, I'm 18, but when I'm 30, I guess I need to start making choices now that are going to lead to this. Like, you will someday be what you're now becoming. And, I think that that's valid. I've lived my life in a way where I've done the very best I could to be useful for people without thinking too much about what I was getting out of it. I'm just like, it's just going to be useful. And I think that because of that, I've been put in a position to be able to be very useful to a lot of people at this moment. And so you'll someday be what you're now becoming, but maybe you never know what it is. It's not about like what you want. It's a good way to look at it. Like, what I want, what kind of life do I want to live? All right, probably some different choices I need to make, but also that one kind of fits into one of my favorite quotes, which is, every man has two lives and his second life begins when he realizes he only has one. And so you're not going to get another chance to get ahead. Like, wherever you are is the earliest you can start. And it's never too late to start being awesome for other people. And it's never too early to start. And like, everything we do at the end of the day, you're like, I'm a domain broker. Well, what you're actually doing is you're finding like a way for organizations who are doing something good, who don't know that something exists that could help more people know about the good they're doing, access that way of reaching those people, right? Like, it's all about connecting at the end of the day and sharing something that we created. And so no matter what we're doing as humans, we're all doing that. All we're saying is that there's energy involved there. So if you look at us, what we'll someday be, we're now becoming. So in 20 years, we'll either be a country that didn't make enough power and we had a bunch of blackouts and we got in a bunch of fights, or, we decided that we were going to pay a never-ending, always escalating energy bill for power that couldn't be delivered after a storm. Or we were going to start building our nation back with massive resiliency. We're going to stop demonizing the energy resources that already exist. We're going to use everything that we can, and we're going to create enough power to do what we want to do as a human team, and that all of us can pitch into that a little bit whenever we're ready. So yeah, we'll someday be what we're now becoming. But do you want to read the other ones, or do we have airtime to do that?
Yeah, no, that's such a good one, and that's how we kick it all off. But yeah, they're at gritcreed.com. But yeah, if you get a chance to check them out, you'll recognize some of them for sure. But no, I love this today, Lester. Really enjoyed, getting to hear more about solar and sharing, what you guys are doing to help, solve and be.
I am not a problem spotter. I am a problem solver.
Exactly.
I love that one.
That's right.
I'll do with what I say I will do. Whoever just glancing at this, if you're lucky enough to find a way to be a member of Support Grit or any initiative of Grit, you're lucky, because Harbin lives everything that I've read on there so far. The ability to maintain long-term relationships, to listen as well as you have. I think you've asked like 3 questions today, and I've gone on a million different paths. And I appreciate you allowing the scatteredness of it. It's just a lot that we're working on, and we just want to execute. That's all it is.
Yeah, no, I love it. But yeah, I really appreciate you being on, and thanks for tuning in for today's episode of the Grit.org podcast, and be sure to tune in next time. Thanks again.